Want to take this time to encourage everyone to personalize your profile. This is the info matches we'll see during your one-to-one connections. You can do so by clicking on your initials and selecting Edit Profile. Some suggestions for you. You can add your industry, areas of product that you're passionate about, some personal hobbies, or other points of connection. You can also include who you'd love to connect with, perhaps people with a certain type of expertise or who are in a certain location. As you're joining us, feel free to jump into the chat and share where you're joining us from today. FYI, I am located near Boston, Massachusetts.
I guess I should also share I am joining from Brooklyn.
Hi, Kim in Denver. Thanks for joining.
Nice, lots of Canadian representation. Very cool.
One person from New Zealand. Hello, thank you for joining us. Great, looks like we have a good number of people, so we're gonna get started soon. Again, just want to remind everyone, if you can update your personal profile by clicking on your icon and scrolling down to profile. Wonderful. Okay, let's get started. I want to start off by introducing our expert today, Becca Hare. Becca is the Senior Manager of UX Research at Etsy and has spent the last decade leading research at some of the world's top consumer technology companies. Her expertise and interest lies in people management, cross-functional leadership, and crafting foundational research that helps define customer needs in ambiguous product spaces. She currently leads a team of managers and researchers across Etsy focused on crafting a best-in-class marketplace experience for buyers. Becca, take it away.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm so excited to be here talking about one of my favorite topics that I could go on and on about, which is research. I wanted to do a second icebreaker if you'll humor me. I always like to know a little bit more about who's here. I know that we are all working in product or product adjacent roles. So if you can drop into the chat, what role are you working in? Are you a product manager? Are you a designer, a data scientist? Really anything. And also want to hear a little bit more about your experience working with research. Have you worked with researchers in the past? Maybe you work at a company that has hundreds of them. Maybe you work at a place that just has one resource, or it's you who's actually doing research yourself. So really interested to hear a little bit about where folks are at before we dive in. Okay, so I'm seeing some people who have no research support who are kind of doing this themselves. Nice, somebody who is ahead of user research, love it. And a lot of people who are working with their first researcher, which is great. A lot of people who have maybe done their own research before, great. All right, cool. Well, I'll try to keep that in the back of my pocket. If at any point you have questions or you're like, wait, I don't even know what this means, I've never worked with a researcher before, we'll definitely have time for questions at the end, or you can drop them in chat. I'm happy to answer them along the way as well. So let's dive in. I was inspired to create this talk for a few reasons. So zooming out, so much has changed, as we all know, since the pandemic hit, about consumer behavior and really business as a whole. And because of all of these changes, it's really felt like everyone was scrambling to dissect this new behavior that happened because of the pandemic and really be as close to the customer as possible. And that's what I've tried to depict in this GIF right here. But, you know, as a researcher by trade, this is music to my ears. But what can happen because of this is teams really rushing to talk to their users and not getting to the depth of insights they need, or just doing research for the sake of doing research, kind of like checking a box. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Sometimes you actually don't need to do research. I cannot believe I'm saying this. And there are so many ways to ensure that your teams are continuously learning so that you, as product managers and leaders, can get the right insights at the right time from the right partner. And this sounds like it would be especially relevant to a lot of you who don't have researchers on your team to begin with. So you are kind of on your own figuring out, how do I answer this question? So hopefully this will be feel useful for you. So one of the things that researchers are pros at, obviously, is asking questions. And then we follow that up with another question and then another until we get at the true insight. So I wanted to spend our time today digging into really two main parts. The first one is knowing which partner to go to answer your questions. If you can't tell already, that's not always going to be research. And then two, how to formulate the right kind of question so that you can unlock deeper insights for your roadmap. So without further ado, let's dig deeper into this, what I like to call continuous learning. So this is, again, looking at where should I go to learn and be able to ultimately dig deeper from the right partner or resource. So before we get into specifics on that, something that I hear frequently from teams of all sizes is that research is really just for the discovery phase of product development. Really in the beginning, trying to figure out, who your customers are, what the problem space is. But once the design and engineering process kicks in, then it's really all about looking at your KPIs or your OKRs, depending on what your team calls them, and really doing that through analytics. And there are a number of reasons that teams associate the discovery phase with research and delivery more with analytics and experimentation. Most commonly, I hear things like building a prototype will take too long, or maybe it's not perfect, it's not the finished state that we want, so it won't have the desired impact if we ship it now. So I wanted to share some quotes that I think relate to this point. And this first one is from Marty Kagan, and I won't read it verbatim, but it's really reminding us that our assumptions about how a product will be used are often wrong, and there are surprises that we learn with data by digging deeper that can lead to real product progress. And then a second quote that I think is really relevant is from Eric Ries of Lean Startup, and really he is advocating for the value of testing an 80% solution with real customers. So basically, what I'm really getting at here is there's room to mix methods across both delivery of a product and discovery, and this can often be the fastest way to learn. So often we do research before experiments, but we can also do experiments and then research if the result doesn't necessarily match our expectations. So having said all of this, I think it's important to call out that there are many different learning partners that you can rely on as product leaders throughout the development process. So in this first bucket, we talk broadly about research, but there are so many different facets to this. There's obviously UX and product research, and there's market research. And one of the questions that I get most often is, what's the difference between the two? Isn't it all the same thing? But really, I think about your partners. Yes, the methodologies may be the same. You know, we're talking to our customers, we are sending out surveys, we're doing brand tracking, things like that. But product and UX researchers are really in the trenches with their product managers, their design partners. They're doing more usability testing, looking at how people are using a product and how that product can better fit their needs. Market researchers are looking at things like global market sizing and opportunity, looking at customer sentiment over time throughout different industries, and really applying that back to things like brand strategy as an example. There's also external third-party resources that you can pull from here, especially if you don't have a research team. So one of the examples of a third-party resource that I've worked with most recently is Baymard. They are a kind of usability and kind of, I guess, benchmarking company that really helps you understand where you have a lot of usability opportunities within your product. So there's tons of third-party resources like this. And then looking at competitive analysis, seeing what other companies are doing, what other products your customers are using, and things like that. And then the second partner is analytics and data science. I think that often it's a little bit unclear, who do I go to when? Do I go to research? Do I talk to my analyst? And so things like really unpacking experiment results, that can tell you a lot about different directions you should go, how your hypotheses are panning out, things like that. There's A/B testing, there's quantitative tracking over time. This is another partner that's really helpful in figuring out how to make sure that you're kind of constantly learning. And then I think sometimes customer support can kind of fall by the wayside, but I actually think that this is really crucial when thinking about all of the kind of partners across all of our companies that we can work with. They are really on the front lines of hearing some of the pain points and themes and requests that are coming up from customers directly. And they are often really good at triangulating those insights with what people are hearing in research, what we're seeing in the data, through things like voice of the customer reporting. And so I know they are a really trusted resource for our team at Etsy. And I think some team that is really kind of often overlooked. So I wanted to try to put this into a framework for when to rely on which types of learning partners. So this is kind of hard to read, but I think that if you are working in a problem space that is really new, that maybe your company has never really worked in before, this is an example of a great time to leverage research, to look at things like a competitive audit. What are other companies doing? What are your customers using, and what role do these products play in their, overall like day-to-day of how they're interacting with certain things? And then this is a great time to partner with a researcher, if you have one, to think through how are we going to answer all of the unknown questions that we have about this new product space. If the answer, on the other hand, is no, this isn't necessarily a new problem space. Another thing that I see companies do a lot is just like, okay, we need to do research for doing research, but don't forget what you've already learned. Most teams have a wealth of past knowledge, past research, experiment data to really pull from and roll up to make sure that your team is grounded in what you already know if the problem space is not necessarily new. And then the second bucket, if you are at the stage where you've designed and built some things, you generally know what bet you're taking at that point. But if you aren't getting great signal on if you're creating value for your customers, then I think that it's important to, at this stage, kind of pause and brainstorm your hypotheses. Think about, do we have the right audience? Do we really understand their motivation for using this product? Maybe we have a usability issue. Maybe we've made a wrong UI decision or placement of a feature, something like that. And then really dig deeper into the data while you're also kind of testing other hypotheses. So this is a really good place to dig in with your analytics and data science partners. And it's also a really great place to bring in research. Like I talked about before, once you've launched something, research can kind of come in. And if you're getting really wonky experimentation results, research can help unpack why that might be happening. And if you're not and you're getting clear signal, keep going. If you are getting kind of negative signal, then maybe it's time to revisit a different point of view, look at your backlog, or maybe this just isn't the right solution and it's time to move on. And then the last question I think it's important to ask yourself is maybe you have unique measurement needs or constraints for your product. And if this is the case, then looking at things like prototype groups, this is something that research can definitely help with. Thinking about longer term holdouts when you think about experimentation and A/B testing to really track behavior over time are all ideas to help you get kind of more signal if you do have a situation like this. All right, so now that we've talked about all of the tools and partners you have to kind of get into the habit of continuous learning, let's talk about how to take questions to the next level. And these could be research questions or otherwise. This is actually much more simple than you think. So I'm going to give you really just a few thought starters to get the wheels turning. Okay, so for the love of all that is good, please stop asking this question. Jokes aside, I still hear that this comes up a lot as a question. Of course, you have built something, you have poured your blood, sweat, and tears into it, and you want to know if people is going to use this. And what I hear behind this question is, we want to start jumping straight to solutioning. We have these concepts, we have this thing, and we want to see if people are going to use it. And really only talking to your customer once there are design concepts to show. So one of the things that I think is really important to kind of pause and consider is that, instead of jumping straight to a solution or straight to testing concepts, I really recommend try taking a look at the customer's daily life. What's motivating them generally? Do they have pain points with the current products that they're using without showing them anything? No designs, no nothing. And really just look at their life. Have them, share their mobile device with you. Look at the apps that they're using. Look at the time of day that they have a need for this particular product. Observe them when they're working, if you're working on more productivity-focused products, things like that. And what competitors are using and what kind of value they're finding in those. And those are going to be where a lot of the biggest unlocks will come from. Really, again, looking at existing behaviors and drilling deep into what motivates them to kind of hire a product to fill those needs. This sounds really simple, but again, like I mentioned in the beginning, I think we've all been really scrambling the last couple of years as we've seen consumer behavior really shift in different ways. And so I think our reaction as product focused people is just, all right, let's get in there, let's figure out, would they use this? And I think it's important sometimes to kind of step back and let go. I know the designers in the room are probably going to hate me for saying this, but like, we don't actually need to show any designs sometimes it really is just digging a little bit deeper into someone's life and being able to extract their needs from those conversations. Another thing I think is really important to pause and ask yourself is why you need this question answered. Again, this is underrated, and it's really about turning inwards and talking to yourself and your team and thinking through what product impact will this have? A really important one, what's the risk of not answering this question? When is it most critical to have these answers? Is it before launch? Is it most important after? Are these insights used for making kind of direct product decisions, or are they more for like long-term planning and aligning on priorities? Sometimes I think we have questions that are more philosophical or hypothetical, or things that we're just really curious to answer, which is fine and great. And it's amazing to be curious. But I do think it's important to pause and kind of think through when something is most useful and how it's tied to direct product impact. I see this a lot with PMs when they're working with researchers to prioritize questions. That sometimes it's not always clear, why is this a question and what impact is it going to have? And, if we're prioritizing this research, what's the risk of not doing it? I think that it's important to consider those things as well. So I pulled together this chart. I actually used to share this around with teams who were kind of doing their own research and were a little bit confused about like, what methodology should I use when? And the reason I wanted to pull it out here is because I think that there are some really interesting thought starters in here for getting at the underlying questions. So thinking about things like usability. Is that more of your question? Is it usefulness? So understanding, where does this fit within somebody's life? Is it sentiment, relevance? Is it more about market sizing? These are, I think, some really interesting themes to think through when you're trying to dig at, okay, what am I ultimately trying to learn here? And that's going to impact how you talk to the user, how you focus that conversation, whether or not you show them concepts or not, and whether this is something you feel empowered to do, especially if you don't have research support, or if this is something where, okay, maybe I need to kind of bring in somebody external or partner with someone else to make this happen. And then on the next slide, there's just kind of more examples here. So I think I am been talking for a while. I think I'm right at the time that I was supposed to be, somehow miraculously. But this is kind of what I wanted us to think through in our practice round together. So think about your own work, and safe space here. No one is going to go around sharing anyone's product secrets or what your company is working on. But I would think of something that you're working on and think about the unknowns that exist and how you might go about finding answers. So thinking about, okay, how could I think maybe differently about the types of stakeholders or sources that I might work with to find the answer to this? And then second, how can I take my existing questions and dig deeper and really get at some of these customer unlocks or really overall questions about your product experience? So if I can clarify any of this, definitely let me know. But Tracy, I think I am passing it over to you now.
Yes, thanks. So now everyone, you will be paired in 2 10-minute one-to-one chats to practice what you've learned. Partner A goes first for 5 minutes, and then partner B goes second for 5 minutes. To enter the one-to-one mixer, click Mixer on the left side of the navigation menu and join now. Pairing, just so you know, is automatic. One tip, exchange your contacts. If you'd like to stay in touch, you'll see a button at the top, and you must click connect or extend the time before the timer runs out, or else the contact information gets lost. After 2 pairings, you will see an announcement, but still need to click back into the session for feedback and Q&A. Welcome.
Thank you. So I've never worked. So we have a researcher, and we have a BI team, but I've never actually worked with them. So what is the best way to start kind of working with them? Like, for example, if I have a product, sorry about that, MSI, how would you initiate their like relationship with them? Like, how we even guide them? Because you need to, yeah, how does that work? How do you work with the researcher team? I've never done that before. So any tips? And the VA team as well, they have a lot of data. How do I go to them and ask for all this data and help with the data?
Yes, it's a great question. First of all, I'll just say that wherever you are right now looks very lovely and warm.
Thank you. It's very warm.
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, I think it can always be a little bit daunting to figure out how to start. And because I have been, talking about questions this whole time, that's really my recommendation, is to start with the questions that you have. I think a lot of insights teams, whether you're talking about researchers, business intelligence analyst, if you go to them and you say, I need data on X, Y, and Z, it can kind of create this moment of panic of like, what is this being used for? And often it is part of our skill set to help really contextualize these insights and help you, instead of saying, okay, here's this long presentation or this spreadsheet of data for you to start looking through. They can tell you, here are the 3 things that you need to know about this study or this analysis. So my recommendation is just to reach out and first of all, kind of set context with them on what's your question? Why are you asking about this? Kind of like, what's the business context for why you're curious about this? And ask if they have some time to kind of, walk through some of their recent research and talk to you about ways that you can partner in the future. That is the best thing to hear as a researcher, that people want to partner and want to figure out how to weave us more into their process, because that's how we can make an impact. And so that's my best advice, is just to reach out, but be super specific on what you want to learn, when you need to learn it by, and why, and then to kind of have them walk you through the insights instead of just kind of asking for a bunch of data sources. I think that would be very well received.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I can do that. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Sure.
I think, okay, go for it,
Anna. Question, curious about recommendations on the type of research to pursue when you're really early in the design stage and wanting to understand the underlying need that the product hopefully will address, and it's too early to be, kind of like you were talking about, to be showing any kind of mock-ups, and trying to do just that phase when it's very early on in the design stage.
Sure. Yeah, this is my favorite stage of doing research personally. The thing I would probably recommend doing, and it's harder now that we're remote, but find some way to gain as much context as possible on a group of users, whether that's a certain segment, or if you're kind of trying to find product market fit, or just understand generally how different types of people are using your product. Just try to get as close to their day-to-day life as possible. So sometimes what this can look like is, like we call it in-field studies. It's basically just interviewing people in their real lives. You could do this remotely. Productivity software is the first thing that pops into my head because of my time at Microsoft. I've worked in this space a lot. And we used to kind of follow people around in their jobs. And so if somebody is a remote worker, for example, you can have them share their screen while they're working and look at kind of like, okay, what communication software are you using? How are you communicating? Things like that are really, I'll give you a kind of an example from my days working at Outlook. We were trying to think through way back when Outlook really didn't have an app. And the whole kind of mobile experience was very new to the way that they were thinking. And so before we even developed what would now be the Microsoft Outlook app, we needed to understand how people were communicating generally. We needed to understand how they communicated at work, how they communicated in their personal life. And if those two things were different types of language, different tools they might be using. And so if you can kind of strip the product away from it, and really get it, like, what's the high level question? How do people communicate? And then a level deeper, how are people communicating at work versus their personal life? And then take that a level deeper. What tools are they using in order to do this, and why, and what needs does that fill? Every layer you'll get kind of closer and closer to the ultimate fit and next steps, and when you're in that early design phase, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I could go next. Thanks, Becca, for sharing, everything that you have been. My question was related a little bit more on the side of, how do you get those insights from your stakeholders? Because, like, as a product owner, right, when the project is like told to you, is a very high level brief of, hey, this is the pain point, and and you kind of go from there, figuring out who the stakeholders and everything. So it can be daunting when you get into the room of your stakeholders and you need to get them to participate and answer all of those questions, ask the right questions. So, like, how do you go about that?
That is a great question. I totally understand it can be a lot and intimidating. I think that hopefully in an ideal world, all of these functions are working really closely together. And so you're kind of aligned on, like, here's our priority, here's this goal that we're all working together, and you kind of work with your insights partners from there to prioritize the questions that you have. But if you're not working in a company that's set up that way, or things are still really early and it's very small, I kind of look at it as what is the business case and business impact. So if you can kind of share with everybody, here's the question, here's the unknown, and if we can answer this is what it will unlock for the business, and kind of frame it in a way where people understand the impact. So why should I do this research, or why should I do this analysis, or why should I spend time kind of rolling up past insights? What impact is it going to have? I think that will help people understand why this is a priority for the company. And I think it unlocks more of a willingness to say, yes, let's prioritize this. Let's focus on this now versus, okay, this is a nice to have, I can get to this later. Does that fully answer your question? I feel like I may be missing pieces of it.
No, that does help. Thank you. And I think another thing that, you were sharing earlier on, I know you were talking with respect to like insights from the customers in itself, but that aspect of, looking at what the existing behavior is, what is their day-to-day life is, I kind of link that to even understanding the processes that our stakeholders have in their day-to-day work lives. Maybe that'll also help understanding that pain point better. So like I kind of, stitched that in from everything that you were sharing before as well. So thank you.
Exactly. Yes. +1 to that. There were a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to before I get to Tina, your questions about product market fit, I wanted to jump back up to Allie's question from before we broke out into the rooms around, if you are in a position where you're trying to roll up past insights, when do those insights become stale and how far back should you go? This is a great question, and I'm going to answer it in a very annoying way and say it depends. I think this is actually something that I have seen a lot when I was even thinking about what inspired this talk. Like I was saying before, that the pandemic hit and everyone's at home, and now consumer behavior is changing and people are spending their money in different ways and using products differently, and focused more on remote work as an example. And it kind of creates this panic of like, oh, is everything that we've learned about our customers completely wrong now? Has everything changed? And so I always think that you can go by time, right? You could say, okay, it's been 2 or 3 years since we have refreshed this resource, and kind of look at maybe that's a signal. Should we double check this? Should we make sure that this is still relevant? But I think the most important thing is looking at your business and your company and seeing what, if anything, has changed. Have you grown your user base in some way? Do you have a new focus? So are you trying to target a new type of user? Are you growing in a certain segment that maybe you didn't anticipate before? Really looking at everything from like different attributes and demographics of those segments. So working with market research to understand how that's changed, working with your analytics partners to look at how the company has grown, how user behavior might have changed. If you've seen a lot of change and growth and it's been a couple of years since a lot of your key resources were updated, it might be a good time to double check. Most of the time, things don't change. Unless your company just completely pivots into a different direction, those insights are still going to be relevant, but you may just want to build on them. And I think sometimes people just need a refresh of some of these kind of evergreen insights that people are constantly using just for their own peace of mind. And so that's also a point where it might be good if your leadership team is kind of like, oh, we don't know if we can trust these resources anymore. That's a really good time to just triple check, work with your analytics partners, work with your researchers to kind of just get a lay of the land and landscape. So I wish I had a more definite answer, but I think you can think about the staleness of your resources in relation to whether or not your company has gone through a tremendous amount of growth or change and pivoting. All right, I hope I answered that. I think I have 1 more minute. So product market fit. This is a tough one. I think there is, like you're talking about early stages. This is why I think there's a few things here. When you are in early stages, oftentimes it is a lot of founders, for example, they get so inspired to start a company because it's a problem that they deal with personally, which is great and is valid. And if they're experiencing it, then I'm sure there are other people experiencing it as well. But I think if that's the case, that's a really good time to kind of gut check. Let's take a look at different types of customers, whether they're in a different location or they have different needs, and kind of see, does this resonate? Does this fill an actual need? Are they currently using other products in the space? And if so, what's the pain point with that product? And can you fill that unique kind of niche gap that they're experiencing? And then I think if you are in a place where maybe you have a more established product or you kind of have an idea for what it should be. A lot of it is going to be just about launching, which is really scary. I know a lot of teams are like, no, we have to do all of this research and we have to make sure that the research is telling us that we have product market fit. And research is only one tiny part of helping you figure that out. And so sometimes just launching and starting to see what your adoption looks like, you know, if there are different types of customers that you're starting to see using it. Yes, Kim, what you said, I don't think we launch soon enough. And so don't be afraid of that, because like I said, research, this is what I actually just talked about. Research is often seen as this thing that, oh, we can only do it in the beginning and we have to get that exactly right. But really thinking about like, what's good enough to launch? What's that MVP? Because that is then where you can go in with research with people who are actually using your product and figure out, you know, oh, we thought it was going to meet this need, but it turns out it's meeting a whole different need that we didn't even consider, and we can really capitalize on that for future growth. So that's probably my best advice with product market fit, is not to get too hung up with research. I know researchers are probably going to kill me for saying this, and really get it to a place where you can launch so that you can learn quickly from there. I don't know, Tracy, are we at time? Do we have more time?
We are at time, a little past time. Great info you shared. Thank you so much, Becca. Do you have one final thought that you could share with us, that, you know, one takeaway that fits on a Post-it?
I'm kind of long-winded, so that might be tough. But I think the one thing I would take away from this is that, well, two things. First, figure out a way to make sure that you are continuously learning. You're pulling from a number of stakeholders and resources, so that you're kind of constantly getting data that you can triangulate, and that's going to help you make even better product decisions. And then I think the second thing would be, don't run straight to solutioning. Really use what you know about your customers and their day-to-day life, and that is going to get you so much deeper than jumping straight to concepts or solutions. And that was not, it's not going to fit on a Post-it, but I hope you take that away.
It'll fit on an extra large Post-it, and
Great.
It was a great takeaway. So thank you once again. Thank you everyone who participated in tonight's event. It was fantastic. I encourage you now to join the post-session mixer, where you can connect with other attendees. Before you log off, please take a moment to complete the survey, and you can find that at the survey tab on the right. So thanks again. Hope to see you in the mixer.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.